So you might need to look at the ground and the lawn. Is it very wet? Is it drained properly? Is it highly compacted? Perhaps it's too shady. You know, is there some trees in your that need a bit of trimming or pruning? So once you've established that actually the conditions are right, maybe you've cut a few branches, maybe you've trimmed a few bushes, you can aerate the soil by maybe using a fork, digging a fork in and just trying to let some air into the soil, and that will help the roots of the grass and that will compete with the moss.
If you go down to a local garden centre and get some of the lawn protection from them, there's many different varieties, and follow the instructions carefully, you'll really sort out the moss and the weeds in your lawn.
Generally, the rule of thumb with seeds is you plant them the same depth as the seed is. So you know, if your seed's sort of half a centimetre, you put it half a centimetre deep. So generally that's the rule of thumb. So not too deep. You need then some moisture. Again, not too wet. It doesn't want to be, if it's completely waterlogged, nothing will happen. So it needs to be damp, dark, moist and warm.
It's probably a few different things that cause this. It could be cold, or maybe too much water. Hopefully the seeds are okay, but sometimes you do get some seeds that don't germinate too well.
What happens with raspberries is actually their own worst enemy. So if you don't prune them hard enough, they end up sprouting all sorts of different shoots and sprouts and leaves. Then the plant itself shades itself. So you get a lot of the flowering buds and things which should make raspberries. If they're too much in the shade from themselves, they'll end up just dying off and you won't get any fruit. So
really, at the end of the season, you have to cut up all the hardwood where the fruit has been on, and then let the new growth from underneath grow, and then trim that in the springtime to help the plant bush out, but not too hard.
I wouldn't go outside. I think the plastic tunnel is a really good idea. Again, make sure it's somewhere sheltered because you don't want it blowing away. Things like the cucumbers, you might want a bit of trellis work because the cucumbers get so heavy that they can pull the fruit over. So somewhere sheltered, out of the way.
Yes, that's okay, but make sure it's warm because it's still April and we're still likely for cold night temperatures, and your tomatoes and cucumbers won't like that too much.
You might be able to go to a garden centre, a few slug pellets, something like that. Generally slugs and caterpillars you can see quite easily, so if you can't see them, they're probably not there. Other things tend to sort of appear and disappear, and you know it's going to be really tricky. So perhaps some netting. I think if you go to the garden centre, you should be able to find some netting. A nice fine netting, if you put that over your plant, that'll actually stop a large number of insects and bugs getting through to them.
This is, I would have thought this is probably slugs that have come out and thought, oh, this is lovely, there's someone wants to feed us here now. So again, I'd suggest that along to the local garden centre, have a word with somebody in there. And you
should find a good sort of compost which is sort of described as seeding compost or something like that, and that compost is carefully designed and put together for exactly that job, raising seedlings. So
well, that's quite easy actually. You just need a good compost, again from a local garden centre. If you can get one with sand in it, it helps you with the draining and propagation.
Good housekeeping is the first place to start. Are the pots new or old? If they're new, then that's fine. If they're old pots, give them a really good clean, bit of disinfectant, just clean them all up.
Looks like they could be a little bit damp. Obviously you're watering them, but if you overwater and it becomes a bit humid, then you're going to get a bit of mould on the outside of the pots.
So the pot should always have some holes in the bottom, and then a bit of stone or pebble at the bottom of the pot will just help the drainage, help the water get out of the pot, because obviously some bigger particles, bigger stones than the compost, so there's a bit more free movement of water around those, so just helps the pots drain.
Actually, pebbles and stones do help if you're using quite a large pot. It helps with the drainage of the bottom, and then you don't have to use quite so much peat or soil medium to fill up your pots with, because bear in mind the roots of little herbs and that, they only really travel down 3 or 4 inches, so as long as they've got good drainage and peat around them, they'll be fine. The pebbles in the bottom will just increase the drainage.
What would tend to happen is as a plant runs out of nitrogen, it would go a bit yellow. So I'm not quite sure how soon they're going yellow, but if they're going yellow very early, then it's probably too wet. If they're going yellow a bit later, probably not enough nutrient in the peat. So
that's quite an easy one really. I should suspect you're overwatering a little bit there. So just cut back right on the watering, almost to them being dry, and then water less frequently.
Normally I would suggest going 2 to 3 pots bigger than what you've got. If you go too big too quick, the plant goes, oh, this is lovely, and sends out loads of roots. So what you do is encourage loads of root growth, but you don't encourage any plant growth. So actually what you want is the two to be sort of evenly matched. So you want the roots to grow out, and then you want the plant to be pushed up as well. So
depends on the size of the plant. If it's getting quite large, perhaps go up to a 10 centimetre, then you can plant them out in the garden or anywhere with plenty space. So you can repot them 3 or 4 times.